One of my favorite photographic activities is night sky photography, particularly capturing the Milky Way with various foregrounds. This inevitably involves setting the camera to a high ISO value, and the higher you go in ISO, the more the camera amplifies sensor noise. Before artificial intelligence programs became available, we had to rely on programs like Sequator to reduce this noise. To use Sequator, you have to take anywhere from about 3 to 15 shots of the same scene, same composition and exposure in each. As you can imagine, since your exposure on each shot can typically be from 10 to 30 seconds, the stars will move slightly from shot to shot. Sequator stacks these shots and aligns the stars. So by looking at what is different from one shot to all other shots in the stack, it attempts to eliminate these differences. Since noise is by definition random and different from shot to shot, the algorithm reduces or eliminates it. Using that same technique, Sequator will also eliminate aircraft strobe light and satellite trails and other random lights like fireflies. Now, in the process of aligning the stars, the foreground effectively moves from shot to shot. So it would normally be blurred when you stack them. Sequator, however, has a function called freeze ground that also aligns the foreground. More recently, we've seen the introduction of programs like Topaz DeNoise and DxO PureRAW that now use artificial intelligence on a single image to eliminate sensor noise. Of course, right after purchasing one of these, Adobe introduced its own AI denoise capability into Lightroom, which I was already subscribed to. That spurred me into comparing all three, plus Sequator, to see which one I was going to stick with going forward. And here's what I discovered. We're going to start with this image, and if we get really brutal here and go in approximately 200%, let's get the hand working here. If we look at both the foreground vegetation and the sky itself, you can see there's a fair amount of noise in the image. This was shot at 3200 ISO, so not unexpected at all. So let's see what happens when we now use Lightroom's own denoise, and I use what seems to be the default 50% setting on the enhance slider in Lightroom Denoise. So if we now switch to the denoised version, you can see there's quite a bit of apparent improvement over the original here. You look down in the clouds that are on the horizon, look in the vegetation, look in the sky, and you will see there's quite a difference. Now, one of the things you tend to get in AI denoising programs are these strange little streaks that look like little pieces of hair or whatever, and maybe that would reduce a little bit if you were to back off on the amount of denoise enhancement that you used. But the other consequence of using AI denoise is that you get this kind of pastel-y, painterly look. You can see that evident in the vegetation here. But one of the things I was impressed with is if we switch back to the original, look at the sharpness, or the general sharpness of the tree here. It's in very good focus. And if we switch to the denoise version, it hasn't degraded these edges by any significant amount. Now if we look up into the sky here at the core of the Milky Way and do the same over here, this is on the original, of course. Look at the amount of noise there, and I'm not perfectly lined up here, but you can see that it's a much more pleasant image to look at. So from here on in the video, we're going to use this image, which is the Lightroom denoised image, to compare with other methods of noise reduction. Like most people, I was waiting for Adobe to come up with its own AI denoise solution. Let's face it, they were late to the party. DxO already had PureRAW 3, and Topaz had denoise, and then later Photo AI. So I compared Topaz with DxO, and I made the decision to purchase DxO. So within DxO, you've got a number of quality levels. You don't have any sliders per se, but the latest methodologies, I guess you'd call it, that they use are Deep Prime and Deep Prime XD. And we're going to compare how those two fare against Adobe's AI denoising facility. In Topaz, I found on this particular image that the standard method worked best of all. And you can see I set remove noise and enhance sharpness to about 30. I found that, again, that worked best for this image. But it may depend on content of your photos, and you might find a totally different setting works better. You're now looking at the DxO Deep Prime setting. And the first thing I noticed when you compare it back to the Lightroom Denoise, there's a loss of resolution there. It's very, very soft, especially around this tree, and you can see compare that some of the stars have actually disappeared. So if we go one further into the Deep Prime XD, which is the highest setting that they have, it's probably a little better. But again, let's go back to Lightroom. See how sharp this is in here. Compare that with Deep Prime XD. It's not as sharp. And the other thing I noticed is you start to get those little wispy lines coming in. So more AI processing, that's kind of inevitable. Okay, this one is Topaz's result. And you'll notice here there's this, that's not actually a light beam in the sky. That's part of their watermark because this is only the demo version. They seem to do a reasonable job on the sky. If we go back to Lightroom's version, there might be a little bit more detail in Lightroom's version, but if you go back to Topaz here, look in the foreground. The vegetation here, it looks very, very weird when compared to Lightroom. Lightroom, you've got a lot more detail that's being preserved. But in Topaz, it's just mushed it all together. So that's probably why I preferred the DxO, which is this one. At least it does preserve some of that information there. But in terms of sharpness, I think definitely the Topaz looks a little better. But since it's doing this funny stuff here, I'm not sure I would stick with Topaz for my particular needs. Now we come to the old analog version. This is Sequator that you're looking at now. And it didn't do anything funny with the foreground here, which is good. But it is kind of soft looking when you go back to Lightroom's version. Look at the edge of the clouds here compared to here. And it's a bit noisy. This is made from a stack of just 5 images. You can go up to 15 images in Sequator before you start reaching the law of diminishing returns. So we'll go a little easy on this because it does predate the AI versions. As mentioned in the intro, one of the benefits of Sequator is that it can remove things like, the strobe light trails that are produced by aircraft, satellites going overhead, and even those pesky fireflies that come up now and then. This particular image doesn't have any of that sort of artifact, so that's not why I'm using it here. But so instead of using just Sequator by itself, in other words, using those 5 images I just showed you, I thought, why not denoise each of the 5 images first? If there was something I had to get rid of in terms of, aircraft trails or satellite trails or whatever, I don't have much choice other than maybe using cloning or something like that, which would take a long time. So Sequator still has its place. I thought, what would happen if you used Lightroom Denoise on each of the 5 images first, and then put them together in Sequator to get rid of that stuff in the sky that you don't want there. And you're looking at the result of that here. So if we go back and compare that with Lightroom, you can see that Lightroom Denoise results in quite a bit more, not quite a bit more, but somewhat more sky detail. A little bit of the stuff in the, the dimmest stars. But of course, you're not going to get the same result as you got on an individual frame like this one in Lightroom Denoise, where you had nice sharp edges in here. When you combine them, even though you've denoised them in Lightroom, there is a little bit of softening here. But if we compare that now with even Deep Prime XD, it still doesn't look bad. So if you needed to use Sequator to get rid of aircraft trails in the sky or fireflies, then that's probably the best way to do it, is to denoise them first using Lightroom AI Denoise, and then combining them together in Sequator. Now, since I created those clips, I had an opportunity to do some more testing, and I believe I have another solution that may be the best yet. What I didn't realize is that both Lightroom Denoise and DxO PureRAW 3 will only work with the original RAW files, because they require information that's embedded in those files to do their thing. They will absolutely refuse to work with TIFFs or JPEGs, for example. Because pre-processing each file in Lightroom Denoise, then processing them together in Sequator is very time-consuming, I thought I'd process them in Sequator first, so then I would only need to process one TIFF file in Lightroom Denoise. That's when the light bulb went off that you can't do that. Lightroom needs the original RAW file. At that point, I decided to revisit Topaz DeNoise, which is only one of 3 programs that will also denoise file formats other than RAW. So I took my Sequator TIFF and processed it in Topaz DeNoise. I was pleasantly surprised at the result. If you need to remove aircraft and satellite trails from your night sky images, consider pre-processing in Sequator and post-processing in Topaz DeNoise. Now I know what you're thinking. This guy was pixel peeping at 200%, so no wonder you can see the minor differences between the programs. Quite true, but if you're considering making a wall-size canvas of your masterpiece, performance does become important. For me, I would like to know that the software I'm using is doing the best job on reducing the noise in my images, regardless of print size. I've shown here how each program handles noise on one particular image of mine. Depending on the content in your images, the outcome might be quite different from what I experienced on my image, so your mileage may vary. I'm not endorsing any one program here, so try downloading trial versions of these programs and see what works best for you. For me, however, my preference in general is to use the new Lightroom Denoise function over DxO or Topaz, except in those cases where there's some annoying aircraft trails or fireflies or satellite trails. You might consider using Sequator first and then denoising it in Topaz DeNoise. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Until the next one, bye for now.